PM for the project and officers from each of the authorities, as well as like to have a warm welcome to Richard and Mark from EST, who will be hosting today's first session. And then to go through a brief agenda for this afternoon. We're going to have EST present first around EVs, and then we'll go into the combined authorities lead on this bid, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'd ask it when we have a Q&A session, if you could put your hand up and introduce yourself and which authority you're from, just so we know who to answer the questions for you. I'd like to say this is the first step in our engagement before we go out to the public and before we procure a concessionary partner. So we're going out to procure a partner for our Levi bid. So this is just early doors, getting to know you and letting you know what the plan is. Officers will be doing further engagement with you and kind of having that more bespoke post this session. If Mark and Richard, are you ready to present?
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, well, hi there, my name is Richard Mallander. I'm from the Energy Saving Trust. I'm part of the local government support programme within the transport area of the trust. And Mark, would you like to say hi as well?
Yeah, so I'm similar to Richard, so I also work in the local government support programme, and for our team I cover the south, which WECA obviously is part of, but my region and kind of the authorities that make up WECA border with Richard's very much so, and we're both kind of here to support you all in this process.
Fantastic. So we'll keep our fingers crossed the technology works with the screen sharing. And I think that has come up okay.
Yep.
Excellent. So we're going to have a brief intro today to the world of the switch to electric vehicles, away from internal combustion engine. We'll have a look at the different types of vehicle that are out there, why the switch is happening, a bit on the policy in progress, which is obviously a thing that's changing, a bit on the charging side of them, a bit of myth busting as well, because we do find there's quite a lot of inaccurate information put out there in some places, and a little bit about the role of local authorities and elected members like yourselves. Just by way of a little bit of background, so the Energy Saving Trust has been around since 1992. We're an independent organisation working to address the climate emergency, help cut people's power bills, stop pollution, all that kind of thing rolled into one. We work with local authorities, individuals, businesses, communities and so on, all around saving energy and reducing carbon emissions. We work across the whole of the UK. Myself and Mark are part of the England side of things. Obviously, there are people working to slightly different regulations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We work with our fleet team, and we work with the teams who are putting together the AUX, the on-street residential charge work scheme, and the Levi, so local electric vehicle infrastructure schemes. So we're not part of those teams, but we do provide some support to them. So looking at electric cars, so this is where things kicked off, which is quite a while ago now. So electric vehicles have been around for a long time. These were some of the first ones, Thomas Parker electric car from 1884 and a replica of the Flocken Electrowagen. Both of them, as you can see, are very much horseless carriages. And around from that sort of era when petrol engines were first becoming viable, electric motive power was viable, and there were some steam wagons out there as well. And it was, sort of interesting to see which technology would win out. Of course, the internal combustion engine did, and became far more the popular one through the 20th century. And really, in terms of electric vehicles in the UK, they became very much niche applications, milk floats, other small delivery vehicles, things used on railway stations for moving luggage around, that kind of thing. But things have changed quite a bit in the last few years, and the things that we started seeing mostly on our roads at the start were hybrid vehicles. So these fall into two categories really. Self-charging, otherwise known as full hybrids or HEVs. So those are ones where you've got a small electric battery as well as an internal combustion engine, and they can be driven just under electric power for short distances at low speeds, that kind of thing, just perhaps moving forward in traffic or, to run for a few miles. They have regenerative braking, so they can recharge the battery. And you get obviously significant emissions reductions because the engine sort of takes a bit of that acceleration away from the internal combustion engine and pulls it out of the battery to get you going. Mild hybrid is a variant on that. So those are ones that they don't have any electric only range. So it's effectively an electro assist to the internal combustion engine, again sort of cutting those peaks of acceleration and therefore reducing the emissions from the petrol engine. Some are available with a manual gearbox, but generally speaking, mild and self-charging hybrids are fully automatic. Moving on from those, we now have the plug-in vehicles. So it's battery electric, so you've got a fully electric drivetrain. You've got a number of examples there, well over 400 different models on the market now. And you have the plug-in hybrids. So the plug-in hybrids are ones where you still have a petrol engine, so you still got your internal combustion engine there, but you have a larger battery. The range of those under purely electric power varies quite a lot. Some are claiming 20 to 50 miles, but others are considerably less, to be fair. There's a fair number of models on the market. They're kind of a stopgap, really, I suppose. You don't get an awful lot of smaller plug-in hybrids. They tend to be the larger ones, where you've got the internal combustion engine is big enough to sort of move the vehicle and the battery as well. Although we're looking at EVs here, it's worth realizing that they're not a silver bullet, and it doesn't sort of get us away from having this what we call a transport hierarchy. So the idea is you go from the lowest emissions at the top, so using electronic devices to do communication so you don't have to travel in the first place, through walking and wheeling, so wheeling being the term used for people using powered wheelchairs, powered chairs, mobility scooters, that kind of thing. Then through cycling, which kind of these days really does get extended to include electro bikes, electric cargo bikes, and electric scooters as well, the little sort of ones see zipping around the place in some cities. And then public transport and shared transport, and then electric vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, and then the highest emissions is around air travel. Also, of course, it depends what you want to do with your road space. So if we switched everything overnight to electric vehicles, you'd still have traffic jams. So that wouldn't solve that problem. So there's still the opportunities for looking at places where we can use bikes more, or buses more, or public transport of other forms more as well, just to make better use of the space that we have available to us. In terms of the policy and the progress and what's happening, so why are we having this push for electric vehicles? Well, the idea is to switch away from the reliance on fossil fuels to power vehicles and to help reduce CO2 emissions and address the climate emergency and improve air quality as well. So at the moment, transport represents something like 26% of all carbon emissions, and that's actually been going up. There's been a switch away, as many as you know, from sort of shopping in town centres to online shopping. And that means that we're getting a lot more sort of smaller to medium-sized freight and logistic vehicles going in our town centres, and a huge growth in logistic centres and massive sheds effectively on the outskirts of many towns and cities. There's also been an increase in demand for SUV-style vehicles over the past 15 years, really, which has increased emissions. It's very much a fashion thing. People have gone for those over smaller city cars or even sort of compact cars. And poor air quality has resulted from a lot of this, which is contributing to about 40,000 preventable deaths per year. There was previously a push for diesel vehicles as well, which was in the early 2000s, late 90s. That did help reduce CO2 emissions to a degree in towns and cities, but it has increased particulate emissions and NOx emissions as well, particularly as those vehicles have got older, are still on the roads, and are putting out far more pollutants than they did when they were brand new. So we're seeing the end of the line for new petrol and diesel cars. There was some back and forth between the present and current administrations at Westminster about what the times and dates were going to be for this, and there was a consultation at the beginning of this year to bring it back to 2030, and the result is a bit of a compromise. So there will be a 2030 cut-off date for the sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles. That's staying in place. But for hybrids, whether it's the self-charging or mild versions of those, they can have still, there will still be new versions of those available to buy until 2035. And thereafter, you won't be able to get those at all. It will be electric vehicles from there. There'll be some exemptions from that as well. Small manufacturers or niche manufacturers, McLaren, Aston Martin, to name a couple of them. But thereafter, internal combustion engines will be only in the second-hand market, and then less and less over the years. So not everybody's going to switch at once. You'll still be able to buy second-hand petrol and diesel vehicles, but the new ones, they will no longer be available to be sold. And that's not just in the UK. This is a trend that's happening throughout Europe and the world in general. How many are on the road already? So as of the end of June 2025, there's something like 2.5 million plug-in vehicles registered in the UK. The majority of them are pure electric ones. A few years ago, it was kind of 50-50 between pure electric and plug-in hybrids. But the pure electric vehicles have been steadily pulling ahead of that, and we're seeing substantial growth in the sales of those over this last 4 years particularly. Across a year, it looks something like this. So 36% of all new cars sold in June 2025 were either fully electric or plug-in hybrids. A lot of those are sold initially into fleet markets, and then, typically after 3 years, they come through onto the second-hand market. But we are seeing a continued increase in the trend towards more and more of these coming to market every year. And of course, there's that's what's called the ZEV mandate as well, to make sure that the manufacturers have to produce more of these. You'll see 2 spikes there in the chart. That was the same even with sort of internal combustion engine vehicles as well, and it's the new registration dates. So people sort of hold off on buying vehicles of any kind in the month before, and then go for the brand new registrations in that month when they come out. Vans and used cars, they're following the same kind of trend. It's lagging the new car markets, obviously, but we are starting to see the same kind of growth, and they are following the same trends. Ex-fleet electric vehicles, particularly cars, are coming to the second-hand market in increasing numbers. The first couple of years, it was mainly the really early Nissan Leaf, but now we're seeing Teslas and sort of later marks of Leaf and other vehicles as well coming onto that second-hand market and being quite popular. Vans, again, not quite so popular yet, but we are seeing a lot of those in fleet markets. We're seeing them with people like the Royal Mail, DHL, Amazon are using electric vans as well, and loads of others too. And yeah, this is just showing a similar thing with the van usage. The rest of the world, so this is a shift that's happening globally. 2024 global electric car sales exceeded 17 million, so that was up 25% from the previous year. The biggest market by far at the moment is China. Got over 11 million electric cars sold in 2024. Europe and the US are also seeing substantial growth as well, but at a slower pace. And we are seeing that sort of trend happening throughout the world, and basically all car manufacturers are now switching to electric drivetrains, whether it's the BMW, VW Group, including people like Skoda, Chrysler, Renault, loads of different Chinese brands as well. It's not just cars either, or small vans. We're seeing an expansion happening in the HGV market. So this is the ultra rapid charging hub at Immingham. It's not just a nice little sort of graphic. It is actually in use. Kuehne+Nagel, one of the sort of the big sort of HGV operators, logistics companies, is already using electric HGVs, using 400 kilowatt chargers. We're expecting to see megawatt class chargers coming in place soon, as and not just at Immingham as well. We're starting to see these things being built at a number of the ports around the UK and in Europe. Of course, electricity isn't the only sort of power source that people have been looking at. This is one that you've probably heard of as well. HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, or used chip fat, as most people sort of style it. That can get you a quick saving on your CO2 emissions, particularly good for larger fleet vehicles where there isn't yet a sort of bespoke electric alternative, or the batteries haven't quite got onto the sort of like the drivetrains yet. So it can be a quick win. Of course, it's still using internal combustion engine, and you have to be aware as well the emissions vary depending on where the HVO oil comes from. So it's not all used chip fat, basically. So there's the graph there is showing the different kinds of sourcing that you get for this. And there is a bit of an issue that we're finding, or the BBC have certainly been doing an investigation and looking at this as well, where there is palm oil, which is basically virgin palm oil, being sold as if it's used cooking oil, and it isn't. And the fact there seems to be by some claims Europe was using more waste HVO than had actually been produced. So you have to sort of check the provenance of this oil and find out where it's coming from. As you can see from those, you can get a good saving from it, but you do need to make sure that the documentation is in good order. Hydrogen is another one we're hearing quite a lot about, and that's going to have its place. The most likely places we're likely to see it is in specialist vehicles, agriculture, possibly use in construction as well, sites with no installed infrastructure or remote location. There are some places where they're trialing vans as well, but there is very little installed infrastructure for this, for the storage or use of hydrogen at the moment. What we may find, and this is something that people in the industry have been talking about increasingly, is that we see a shift to battery-powered specialist vehicles and battery-powered HGVs. Tarmac were talking about this at a recent conference I was at, where they're already running battery-powered HGVs on site, and concrete mixing trucks as well. But it may be that we use or see the repurposing of the existing natural gas network within the UK to pump hydrogen around the network, and then it's burnt in situ to generate the power for electric HGVs and electric specialist vehicles. So it may be that we'll get hydrogen, but not quite possibly the way we thought. It may not actually be used and actually carried on the vehicles and burnt on the vehicles. I'm going to hand over to Mark now to talk a bit about the charging side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I hope that's been useful for everybody. So before we get into the actual charging stuff, a little bit of jargon busting, just in case anyone's not quite as familiar with this as Richard and I and your officers are. So a kilowatt is, or kilowatt hour, sorry, on the left-hand side of the slide, is a measure of energy. And in terms of EVs, it is related to the amount of energy that a battery can store. It's what your batteries will be quoted as a size in kilowatt hours when you go to the dealer, or if you look on the internet. And very simply think of it as the fuel tank in an ICE car. In that the bigger the number of kilowatt hours, the longer the car's range, the bigger the battery. On the other side of the slide, you've got kilowatts, which is a measure of power, and that's what your charge points are going to be rated in. So when Sophie talks a bit about the Levi process in a little while, there'll be mention of kilowatts and the number of the amount of power you can get from each charge point. And again, very simply, the higher the number of kilowatts, the faster charge you are likely to be able to get from that charge point. It's not quite as simple as arriving at a petrol station as a lot of us do now, putting the nozzle into the car, and you get a dispensed fuel at a set rate depending on the size of the pump. It's a bit more like that kind of graphic of the bath and the tap. So the more you turn on the tap, the bigger the greater the measure of power, the greater the flow of power into the battery. The shorter it's going to take to charge that battery up, and the shorter it's going to take to fill up your bath. or your battery. Also depends obviously on how full your battery, your bath is before you start filling. But yeah, that's kind of that's an easier way, hopefully, of making that comparison. But Rich, if you could move me on again. There are various different speeds of EV charge point. There we go. So we've got all the way from kind of slow, and these are the kind of official classifications that the government has been suggesting that we use through the Levi Fund or the Levi scheme, and they're kind of slowly making their way into industry. Although I will show you a graphic in a few slides' time that is from ZapMap. He uses a very slightly different way of sectioning up, which is a little unhelpful, but broadly you'll be able to get the picture. So starting on the left-hand side of the slide, you've got your slow chargers, so less than 3.7 kilowatt AC. The sort of things you might get from a standard 3-pin plug if you're using one of those, or possibly a lamp column charge point where there's kind of a restriction on the amount of power that it can deliver. Standard chargers are the 3.7 to around about 8 kilowatts, still AAC power, so alternating current. And this is the vast majority of the charge points you've probably seen in residential areas so far, and in car parks. If you've been seeing chargers in car parks, they'll almost certainly be a form of standard charging. They can either be bollard mounted, as you can see on the bottom picture, under that heading, or you can get units that are mounted on walls or on pillars, as you can see in the top picture. So they're quite small, quite compact. Increasingly so, actually, if you go to any trade shows or any things like Everything Electric, you'll be able to see a variety of charge points on show, some particularly compact ones from manufacturers that use lamp column chargers. Moving on again, you've got your fast chargers, which are also AC, up to around about 43 kilowatts is the kind of maximum top out for a fast charger, although it says 50 on the slide. That's kind of the nominal classification, but generally they top out about 43 kilowatts. And this is where the actual charging units themselves start to get a little bit bigger, a little bit more chunky, because they're doing more work internally in the unit to deliver that power to the vehicle. Moving on again, you've got the rapid and ultra rapid, which if you were to place them side by side, they look pretty much identical to each other. The difference is in how much power they can deliver to the vehicle. But this is where you get to the really big chunky units, the sorts of things that you'll see around motorway service areas or other kind of dedicated EV service stations and service areas. They're sort of person height and up to about a meter or so wide. But this is where you get to the kind of really rapid. Apologies for that. The really fast charging speeds, where you've got particularly powerful chargers doing that kind of work. And we'll get into kind of what that means in terms of recharging in a minute or so. But before we do that, Rich, if you could move me on, I want to talk a bit about socket types. So the vast majority of vehicles on the roads now will either use a combination of Type 2 and CCS. Type 2 is for the slow, fast, and standard chargers, and CCS for the rapid and ultra rapid chargers. You can see they look pretty similar from those two pictures. CCS, quite simply, is a Type 2 charger with those two extra prongs on the bottom. And most cars, it varies slightly by make, but most cars will have an additional kind of flap that you pop out to use a CCS. It uses exactly the same kind of top part of the charging socket, and then you just pop out an extra flap dust cover to use the CCS if you're plugging into a rapid or an ultra rapid charge point. The most important thing to remember about these is that if you're using a Type 2, you will have to, in most cases, supply your own cable, which might come with your vehicle, or you might have to buy it as an aftermarket accessory, both of which are equally possible. They're not super expensive unless you want to go for a really long one. They did used to be supplied as standard with all EVs, but some manufacturers are now selling them as an optional extra. Or you can buy, like I say, you can buy your own one, not directly from the manufacturer. If you're looking at CCS, they will always be a tethered cable, so the cable will be attached to the charge point. You don't need to provide your own cable at any CCS charge point that you might be using. So you don't need to purchase one. If people say that you do, that's not true. What you can buy, and kind of linking to the CHAdeMO socket on the other side of the slide, is you can buy an adapter which will adapt a CHAdeMO charge point to a CCS charge point. but that's only really applicable if you've got an older EV, so there's something like a first generation, maybe a second generation Nissan Leaf or something like that, because CHAdeMO is very much being phased out. Almost every single manufacturer, if not all of them at this point, are using CCS for the rapid charging. So CHAdeMO is the other option for rapid charging, and again, if that's available, it will be tethered to a tether cable to the charge points. You don't need to purchase your own. But yeah, very much being phased out by all manufacturers now. And then the final option, the little box down the bottom, is the Type 1. And again, that was only really an option on the very early EVs, particularly the first generation Nissan Leaf and Renault Zoe, things like that. If you've got one of those, if you're buying a second-hand car, it's worth checking that you don't, whether you have a Type 1 or a Type 2 for your AC charging. But it will be very clear that you have a Type 1, and hopefully you will be supplied with a cable with the vehicle, because typically they came with the vehicles at that point. So hopefully those cables have remained with those vehicles throughout their life, but you can just as easily pick them up online if you need to for those. But so for every single charge point we're going to look at in the next few slides, there will either be a Type 2 or a CCS plug on all of them. So Richard, if you could move me on again, we'll talk a little bit about slow charging. So this, if you've not come across slow chargers, this will hopefully give you a bit of an idea of kind of what they look like, where you can find them, and how long it will take to charge. And so with this slide and the next couple, we've worked out the rate of charge and the time it will take you to charge based on you rolling up to that charge point with absolutely nothing left in your battery at all. So if you've come in with absolutely no kilowatts, no juice left, nothing at all, this is how long it would take you. Or the figures on our slides here are how long it would take you to fully recharge that battery. To give you an idea of kind of how long it might take. But realistically, as you do with your current cars, if you drive petrol or diesel, you don't go to a service station unless you've messed up slightly. You don't go to a service station completely empty. You will always have some petrol, some diesel left in the tank. It's exactly the same with the EVs. You wouldn't run it completely empty and then look for a charger. You would get to the kind of, the equivalent of a red warning light popping on your dashboard, and then perhaps start looking for a charger. So if you're charging at home using a standard 3-pin plug, you're going to get no more in almost every case than 2.3 kilowatts of AC charge. It's going to take you over a day to fully recharge if you've got a 60 kilowatt battery, 60 kilowatt hour battery, apologies. There's no installation cost attached to these unless you don't have an external socket on your house already. You can do this. It's something that can be done. But as it says on the slide there, it's not generally recommended for regular use, purely because the cables that you're using and the sockets that you're using to do this, even if they've been installed for the dedicated purpose of charging, lack some of the safety features that you find in actual proper EV charge points, home ones or public ones. But you can use them in a pinch. If you're in an emergency, you can use a 3-pin plug if you need to recharge your car. Moving on to the other side of the slide, you've got public charging via things like lamp columns. Typically, these are lower power than the bollards that we'll look at in a second, and that's because they're limited by the amount of power available in the lamp column. They can be a little bit quicker, a little bit faster, a bit more powerful if the lamp column has been converted to LEDs, because obviously they draw less power, than a traditional bulb. So that can free up a bit more power that can be used to recharge a vehicle. But again, you're not getting a massively quick charge, so anywhere from sort of 20 to 12 hours, depending on exactly how much power you're pulling from that lamp column to fully recharge a 60 kilowatt hour battery. And these do come, of course, these are public chargers, they come with cost attached, so anywhere between 39p per kilowatt off peak, up to, in some cases, 61p per kilowatt for peak time use. And that's very dependent on kind of where you are and what network you're looking at. And it can vary significantly between networks as well as between times of day. There are more networks now offering an off-peak service, typically between about either 8 or 10 p.m. and around about 6 a.m. the next morning. They will offer a lower rate of charge or lower price to charge while still charging at the same speed, same power, purely because there's less demand on the grid, and it helps you and it helps them spread demand on the grid and kind of balance out any peaks in power use that might happen otherwise. Rich, if you could move on again, we're going to look at standard charging. So this is, like I said before, this is the majority of charge points you will see. There we go, thank you. Either on street or in car parks, at Tesco's, that kind of thing. And the similar, very, very similar between home chargers and public charge points. You'll get up to 7 kilowatts of AC charge from any of these units that you can see on the screen. That is slightly limited by the power of the onboard charger in your vehicle. It's just slightly complicated, but basically all of the power, any AC charge point goes through an onboard converter in the vehicle that converts it to DC, which actually charges the battery. So on most cars at the moment, or on a lot of cars at the moment, it's a 6.6 kilowatt onboard converter, which means that you can't ever get more than 6.6 kilowatts of AC charge. Not an issue for DC charging. We get onto that in a couple of slides time. That doesn't count. So just for AC charging, you might be limited by the power of the converter in the vehicle, and it's worth checking if that's something you're interested in or concerned about. It's worth checking that with your dealer before you purchase. But that is, it's more than sufficient to use any charger. And if you've got a charger that is more than 7 kilowatts, it doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means your power will be limited to whatever the power of your onboard charger is. But for all of these chargers, it will take around about 8 hours to fully recharge your battery. If you're looking at a home charger, they're anywhere between about £700–800 and sort of the sky's the limit almost. I've put 1,500 on the slide. But there are some quite fancy chargers out there now that either look that a bit more premium, or they have additional functionality, or both, so you can integrate with solar PV and battery storage. There's a few chargers out there. You may have seen some announcements from Octopus recently that can offer vehicle-to-grid charging on top of everything else. So that is kind of bi-directional charging, where you can take power from your vehicle and put it back into the grid, or put it back into your house if you're needing to. And they typically come with a slightly higher price point because they are with a newer technology, but also they are that bit more tech savvy in the actual charge point itself. Public charging, very, very similar. Again, the cost is going to vary by network, and it's worth checking that before you plug in. But yeah, in terms of the capability, they're pretty much the same as a home charge point for these chargers. Rich, if you could move us on again. Apologies, I'm just going to pick up on the question from Sean on that last slide. So rates for home charging are going to be anywhere from, if you're with a dedicated EV tariff, you can get rates as low as about 7p per kilowatt if you're charging overnight. And if you're looking at charging during the day, or you're not on a specific EV tariff, it will be the same as your day rate, whatever your day rate is per kilowatt. Typically that's something like 27–28p, maybe slightly more. And Mike, it comes as standard.
It's complicated, Sean, because your provider may change your entire tariff downwards once you install EV. So I pay less for all of my electricity now than I was before I had an EV charger, because they do a deal on the whole house.
But yes, no, there are certainly deals to be had if you look around. But yeah, no, that's a good point. Thanks, Chris. If we look at fast charging now, so these are all public chargers. You can see on the screen. It's very, very unusual to find one of these as a private, certainly as a domestic charger. Some offices may install them, but they're very much more public charging. Excuse me. Still on AC, so 1122 or 43 kilowatts are the typical power ratings that you can get, and that's going to pretty significantly change how quickly you can charge your battery if your car can accept a charge at any of those powers. So if your car is able to accept an 11 kilowatt charger at full power, it will take 6 hours to fully recharge your battery. Same if you can accept a 43 kilowatt charge at full power, it will take about an hour and a half. So it's really starting to kind of bring those charging times down. But there are very few cars on the road at the moment that can take a 43 kilowatt charge at full power from an AC charger. And again, as with everything else, the cost varies by network, anywhere between those two and possibly higher now as well. And then the final picture on that slide is just to show you kind of a bit of an example of what a rapid charger or a fast charger can look like with, so that one on the right hand side has got a fast AC charger on the left hand side of the 3 plugs, a CCS charger up to 50 kilowatts DC in the middle, and then a CHAdeMO up to 50 kilowatt DC on the right hand side. So just to show you that they are available with all 3 options in one charge point, although I think they are kind of increasingly rare. As we said before, the majority of manufacturers now switching to offering Type 2 or CCS, so making the CHAdeMO kind of less needed. Rich, if you could move us on to the last one of these slides around charging, so rapid and ultra rapid charging, and this is where you can see the kind of the real benefit of rapid and ultra rapid charging. It takes considerably less time to charge on these. So these ones are not limited by the power of the onboard converter in the vehicle. The charger handles that conversion and it delivers power directly into the battery in DC, which is why you can take advantage of these as much faster charging powers, or charging speeds. Again, it cost varies by network. They tend to be higher cost, just because the infrastructure cost of putting these things in is that much higher, and the network's obviously looking to recoup their investment. But they do provide a really useful option if you are en route charging, to kind of have a quick top up on the road before you get going again. Increasingly, we're seeing things like the GridServe hub. That particular one is in Braintree in Essex, or the Ionity hub on the right hand side, springing up at motor service areas, and they typically offer power charging up to anything up to 150. In some cases, some of the chargers on those pictures will be able to offer 350 kilowatts if your car can take those, and not all cars on the road at the moment can take 350 kilowatts. I think it's typically at the moment it's the higher end cars, so the likes of a Tesla Model S, Jaguar I-Pace, some of the Porsche models I think can take 350. There are much greater number of cars that can take anything up to 150 kilowatts, including my car, and probably a number of you on the call will have vehicles that can take up to that. So it's going to take you, no more than sort of half an hour. Typically, if you're using these chargers, you're not going to go in with anywhere near an empty battery. You're going to go in with maybe 10-20% left. And the recommendation from the manufacturers is that you charge up to about 80% on these chargers, purely because for that last 20% or so, the rate of charge will slow down significantly. So typically what you're looking at is enough time to arrive at these places, plug in, go into the service area, get a coffee, go to the toilet, come back out, and you'll be ready to go again. And that's the model that those ones are built on. So it's the focus is going to be on getting you back on the road as quickly as possible, so you can continue your journey and top up again at the next one if you need to. In terms of finding a charge point, if we move on to the next slide, hopefully it has worked. Apologies, the map is quite large scale. I'm not going to try and talk you through all the different kind of coloured blobs. This is a screenshot from ZapMap, and it shows you the kind of the range of different chargers that are around. I've tried the big area on the top sort of left-ish is Bristol, so hopefully you will recognise the rest of the map based on that. So there's a number of chargers already. I know Sophie and the team are going to talk more about kind of the plans to expand that network, and in surrounding areas as well, a little bit later on. But just to show you, this is what's kind of currently available. I believe the darker coloured dots or blobs are the rapid and ultra rapid chargers that we were just talking about. ZapMap is a really great resource. It has, I think, pretty much every single public charger in the country available to view, and it does things like show you live availability, live usage, and price cost, all those kind of things. But increasingly, we're seeing Google integrating this into their mapping software as well, so you can use both or either or to plan your journeys. It's really worth having a look at ZapMap if you want to have a look at some of kind of all the functionality it offers and what you can do with it. And then I think the final slide from me, Richard, is just another note on charging at home. I know colleagues from the different authorities will talk about this a bit as well. It's very much a hot topic, particularly among residents. So I would be surprised if there isn't one of you on here on this call who has already had a question about charging gullies or cross pavement solutions or something like that come into your inboxes or be asked to you in person. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. and they are very simply ways that you can, or that a resident can, take advantage of their lower rate of lower cost of home charging by running a cable safely across the footway, not creating any kind of trip hazard, but then taking advantage of the lower rate of cost for home charging. They are somewhat contentious. I'm not going to get into all of the detail around what the contentions are just now, because we'll be here for the rest of the day. But there is advice and guidance online, and there is more coming out in the next few weeks as well, that are designed to help you and help your officers to navigate the complexity around charging gullies. Richard, I think that's me. I'm handing back to you to do a bit of myth busting.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, so we've put in. Oops, not doing nothing. So we put in these this section because we're aware that there's lots of strange and curious stories that sort of do the rounds of the internet around electric vehicles, and we've had all kinds of strange questions. I think the strangest was, would we get radiation poisoning from driving one, which was, no, they're not nuclear powered. It's not quite sure where that came from, but we did get some odd questions. So range anxiety, or I can't drive far enough, is one that's come up quite a lot. And there's the perception that you can't go very far at all. Somebody I was talking to earlier today has a parent who was saying they're refusing to buy one because they can't go more than about 30 miles, which is complete nonsense. So there's loads of different types of vehicles out there, different ranges, as it were, within those. So you've got the small electric vehicles, maybe have a range of 100 to 160 miles. So your little city cars, as they were. Medium compact vehicles, 145 to 185, and then larger ones as well. There's someone fairly close to me who's got an estate car. Estate cars seem to be having a bit of a comeback. So it's BMW estate car. It's got a range of over 200 miles. And then you get the SUV ones, which are bigger battery, and they have bigger ranges as well. What we do find, though, is that the range that you can travel is more than enough for most people's daily and weekly journeys and commutes. Battery technology keeps improving, but we also find that people greatly overestimate the distances that they actually do travel. So most people are sort of commuting 5 miles, 20 miles tops, that kind of thing, and that's well within the range of all the vehicles that are out there of any power source. And just as you don't need to fill up your petrol tank every day, you don't need to top up the battery every single day. There's more than enough juice to do the journeys that people are doing. If we do look at some of the distances that some of the newer ones can travel as well, so the longer range ones, you've got everything up to about 481 miles for the Mercedes EQS, Volkswagen ID7, 437 miles, and so on. And there's always new ones coming to market as well. Broadly speaking, the more expensive they are, the longer range they've got, and that's broadly because the newest technology goes into the most expensive vehicles, and that's where you see the longest ranges. But of course, then that does work its way through the other models that are available from those manufacturers as well. We often get asked, do we need to replace the batteries, or do they need to be swapped out, or do they degrade quickly? Are they costly to replace? So EV batteries are an array of individual battery cells. It's a high value component of the vehicle, and each cell within that can be removed and replaced if necessary, but it's not something you could do yourself. It would have to be done by a sort of garage or sort of a dealership. But each single battery cell can be removed and replaced if necessary. Battery degradation estimates are around about 2 to 3% per year. It's very rare to have to replace an entire battery. The manufacturer's warranties do cover the battery performance and degradation as well. The end of the life of the batteries, they could still be repurposed for other things, such as energy storage systems. So they've got a resale value apart from the value of the car. And there is a growing industry looking at battery repurposing and recycling. Although that said, a lot of people are having home battery storage systems installed in their houses now. But those aren't ex-electric vehicle batteries. Those are a new build. And the reason is that the batteries are lasting far longer than people expected. And so they're still working away in the cars that they were originally designed for. We do hear about people saying, well, the production is unsustainable and worse than petrol and diesel. It's true, there's a carbon footprint and levels of pollution associated with battery production, just as there is with almost all human activity, and particularly extractive industries like mining and like oil drilling as well. But overall, it's less in terms of a carbon footprint and a pollution footprint than you get from the oil industry. So many electric vehicle battery manufacturers are already using renewable energy themselves to try and reduce the carbon footprint of the production side of things. We also find that manufacturers are increasingly cautious to ensure ethical sourcing, the best sourcing they can from their supply chains. You often see pictures of people grubbing around with hand tools in atrocious conditions, and that's not really where the materials come from to make the batteries. You couldn't have a robust supply chain for that, doing it that way, for one thing. So they're looking at more robust production and supply chain out there from the extractive industries. They're very, very keen to reduce the manufacturing emissions, because the more emissions you've got, the less efficient your process is. They're looking at improving the actual batteries and using less of any rare materials or rare minerals, particularly, than before, and trying to find a way to improve the battery chemistries and use less rare earth materials, so potentially not lithium. So what we are seeing is a wholesale transition to an electric drivetrain, and internal combustion engines have kind of reached as far as they can probably go, or possibly go, in terms of their development. But in terms of the battery chemistry, that's something that is still evolving and will get more mileage from less rare materials in the future. And there is recycling already out there that can recover almost all the metals out of this. The issue is, as ever with most things, it's recovering the plastics, which are the wrappings and the casing around those. Reuse of plastics is an issue. We do get people saying, well, there's no real CO2 emissions saving from this as well. And there was a story that went out in a paper, I think it was late last year, saying, well, we looked at it, and over 25 years, the emissions would be just as bad from a petrol car. That wasn't true. It was a highly biased article, and it was working on the assumption that all the electricity that you used to power the vehicle over its entire lifetime came from a coal-fired power station. Now, no country is just using coal-fired power stations for absolutely everything anymore. So it was a kind of a very, very biased report, and we do see quite a few of those. If you look at the emissions over the lifetime of a vehicle, I've got 4 lines on the graph there. So the blue one is taking the assumption that you've got a battery electric vehicle and that you're using completely renewable sources of energy generation for that battery over its lifetime. So in which case it would be pretty much flat out of the factory. Of course, that's not terribly realistic. In what you actually find is more of a mix. So if you had a mixture of power sources that were increasingly using renewables over the lifetime, but still started out with some gas or potentially coal, depends where you are, that kind of thing, then you would have an increase over the lifetime of the vehicle in terms of the CO2 emissions. The grey and the black line there are looking at petrol and diesel cars, and there you'll notice that those lines actually start below the battery electric one, because you've got the carbon emissions that are associated with producing the vehicle, whereas with the battery electric ones you've got the carbon emissions associated with producing the battery and the vehicle as well, so that's slightly higher. But then you start driving those cars, and then you're sort of producing CO2 all the time. All the time you fill them up, it's more petrol, more fossil fuel being burnt. So you get a crossover point very, very rapidly at about 8,000 miles, beyond which the continuing use of fossil fuels to power the vehicle exceeds the emissions that you get from charging up an electric vehicle. Air quality is a big issue as well in many cities. Obviously, electric vehicles have zero tailpipe emissions because they have zero tailpipes. I have seen a couple of retrofitted ones where you can put fake tailpipes on, which, if that sounds crazy, the Fiat 500 Abarth version comes with speakers to make the sound of a sort of really sort of hefty petrol engine to it, so you can actually play the sounds of an a petrol car. To make it sound like to make an electric vehicle sound like a petrol car, which is a bit crazy, but it's a fashion thing. So if you're removing petrol and diesel cars out of the mix and having more and more electric vehicles, you're removing millions of point sources of pollution, which means that you're also removing the need for millions of catalytic converters. And I've no doubt heard about how inefficient they are at short distances and lower temperatures, and that people steal them as well. So there will still be some particulate emissions as well that can arise from brake dust. Heavier cars require more braking effort. If you get an equivalent petrol car and battery car of the same class, then the battery one will be generally heavier, so you'd need more heavier braking to slow it down. But you've got regenerative braking, remember, as well with electric vehicles and with hybrids. So that's actually taking some of the effort off the brake pads. So you're getting less emissions overall from the braking effort. On that size of them, they're all too heavy and they're going to destroy roads and they're responsible for all the potholes and all this kind of thing. And car parks are going to collapse. So strangely enough, the people who design car parks put in margins that allowed for heavier vehicles, and that's not going to happen. So car parks are not going to collapse. They're well capable of holding heavier vehicles than the ones that have been around for years. As I said, if you do get equivalent, if I may, we'll cover questions at the end.
No, I'm just going to add a sentence to you there that might help you. We've had that attack, and the line I have been using on it is, when I get in my Zoe, I add, the difference between an electric car of my model and a non-electric is 50 kilos. Give them a clue, I weigh more than 50 kilos. And therefore, it's total tosh.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I don't have a car, but if I wanted to reduce the weight of me in a car, then I think sort of losing a few pounds myself might be a better option. On the cars on the roads, yeah, it's true. You get sort of generally they are electric vehicles do tend to be a little bit heavier for the class, but that's not to say that they are responsible for trashing the road surfaces. We do find that there are a lot more cars out there and a lot more delivery vehicles as well on the roads. They tend to be heavier too. And it's the weight of the vehicles and that trend of people wanting more SUVs that has caused more damage to roads as well. And like myself, unfortunately, many cars have had a bit of middle-age spread. And here we see a typical difference in the types of vehicles there. It's not just about the weight of the roads as well, and I'm sure many of you have had some complaints about parking and issues around parking in your areas as well. And where it used to be that you could have a car parked either side of a road and then room for two passing, now you've got one parked half on the pavement, the other one parked half on the pavement, and just room for one down the middle of the road as well. So there's that sort of fashion thing that may not be a trend that we see in the future, because we are seeing more small electric vehicles coming to the market as well, and a move towards those. There used to be a criticism too that there were no small EVs on the market, and within the European market that was very much the case, but that is now changing, and we're seeing an increasing number of manufacturers bringing out smaller city cars or doing kind of a retread of old favourites. So we had the BMW, as it is now, Mini, is switching entirely to electric drivetrain. Although interestingly, if you look at the underplay the base of the vehicle. It's still sort of kitted out as if it was a petrol one. But Renault are bringing out their new version of the Renault 5. There's the Fiat Grande Panda, Dacia Spring, and there's loads of others as well. Breakdowns and maintenance. There was some strange stories doing the rounds about you couldn't recover them because you couldn't tow them. Yeah, if you towed an electric vehicle, then that can cause problems if you just sort of have the wheels spinning. But both the RAC and the AA have got solutions for that. That mean that it doesn't cause any damage to the car, so you can recover an electric vehicle without any issues. Both the RAC and AA can do small charges at the roadside, or more generally, if you're out of power, they'd recover you to a nearest charge point. Both them are reporting that EVs are generally less likely to break down. They've got fewer moving parts. There's less to go wrong. And even allowing for the fact that there are fewer EVs on the road and that those vehicles are generally newer, they're still seeing a lower percentage of call-outs related to electric vehicles than to internal combustion engine vehicles. This is one that we've seen an awful lot, that an electric vehicle burned down Luton Airport car park. That wasn't true, but it didn't stop the story going out in the national press in the UK that it was an electric vehicle. There was an investigation into that. It was pretty soon that it wasn't an electric vehicle involved, but it didn't stop the stories going around, and we see quite a lot of these as well about, they spontaneously combust and nonsense like that. So the one at the Luton Airport car park was a diesel Range Rover, and it was actually on fire when it was going into the car park. The CCTV showed it was smoking as it was passing the entrance barrier, and the person who was driving it did actually try and put the fire out. They used 2 fire extinguishers to put the fire out. It spread from car to car. They couldn't stop it. And the design of that particular car park made it a bit like a blowtorch internally. There was a 10-mile-an-hour wind. The fire spread very, very rapidly, and they just couldn't stop it. But it was nothing to do with electric cars. There were no electric vehicles involved. There was nothing to do with charge points involved. But it was a story, inaccurate, but a story, and it still kept doing the rounds. There's been a lot of work being done by the Fire Protection Association and others as well looking at this. So just because a car catches fire doesn't mean that it's the battery that's the problem. Just as an ordinary car, if there's a fire with it, it doesn't mean that the petrol tank has caught fire. Unlike Hollywood, when you touch a car and it has a crash, they don't all immediately burst into flame. So lithium-ion batteries fires are rare. If one does catch fire, then they can release gases that are flammable, toxic. It's a very, very nasty kind of fire. You can get reignition off them. It doesn't always happen, but the fire protection authorities, the fire and emergency services do take precautions against that. There was a situation near me just the other week where they have Lime hire bikes, if you are familiar with those. And a couple of lads thought it would be great fun to take the battery off this electric hire bike and repeatedly smash it until it caught fire. And then the fire services did turn up, and they dumped it in water just as a precaution against reignition. But the ones that are in cars are obviously within much more robust safety containers, and the cars have to pass the same crash tests as any other vehicle out there as well. But if there are fires, you do need special equipment to make sure you get a full and safe extinguishment of the battery fire. But overall, the degree of hazard is about the same as from an internal combustion engine car. It's just that we're more familiar with that, and so people sort of see something that's new, unfamiliar, and attribute a higher risk than is actually the case. We're quite often asked why we can't just have rapid charge points everywhere, and I think Mark's really covered a lot of this. So broadly speaking, there's no need. So if you've got a gas heater development of 25 flats, so the energy demand is something like 50 kVA, that's more or less the equivalent to one rapid charger. But you don't need that all the time. You don't need to go in and fully charge your battery off a rapid charger and then go. In some circumstances you might, but more likely you'll be charging at home at the end of the day, or if you reached a car, or if you're going into a superstar or a retail park or something like that, you might plug in and charge for a while you're there as well. So it's a different model of charging. Can the grid cope? Well, do remember that not everybody's going to be switching overnight. It's not going to be like 2035, 2030 rolls around and everybody immediately switches to electric cars. Lots of people will still be using petrol and diesel cars for quite a long time beyond that. We are seeing a growth in renewable energy and consequent changes to the grid anyway. So people are having to put in new transmission lines to get power from the renewable places where the offshore wind farms and presumably some new onshore wind farms as well, solar power and so on. So there will be new transmission lines going in, and there is a lot of work being done to upgrade the grid locally as well by the network operators to ensure that we've got a robust power supply. It's not just about electric vehicles. If you look at all the new housing developments, they're predicated on having a far greater amount of electricity supplying all the stuff in there and no gas. So why are you involved? Because after all, you're not running petrol stations. Well, this is a big change to the infrastructure and the way that we live and operate and travel and all this kind of thing. So with local government, there's a lot of work being done around, for example, the Levi project and the York project, and that involves identifying sites, engaging with the communities, working with the public and with the charge point operators. Remember, the Levi grant is not just a grant for the companies to put in the charge points, it's for them to be part funded for that, but they're going out to the commercial market to say, okay, we're going to make an investment and we are going to be expected to make a profit out of this as a company. But within that, you've also got yourselves as a local councils, local authorities looking for places where the commercial operators don't want to go initially and saying, okay, we don't want any of our neighbourhoods left behind. We don't want rural areas left behind. We don't want areas where there's poor people who are less likely to make that transition to electric vehicles left behind as well. And we also want to make sure that charging is accessible as well where practical. Because if you look at typical persons or typical household CO2 emissions, that's where we were in 2017. And that's where people are heading to for the target for 2050. We realise that there's some political contention around this, but that is nevertheless the target that we're heading towards in the UK at the moment. It's written into legislation. That is what companies, organisations, local authorities are aiming towards. And within that, for local authorities, you'll have the expectation of cooperation between and within authorities to produce a strategy. You're the best place to understand your areas and support your residents and businesses. In some countries, this has been done very much as a top-down. But within the UK, there's far more of a role for local authorities in making sure that the infrastructure for charging is available on an equitable basis. And again, within that, you know your areas. So you've got issues around community leadership, making sure that you have informed decision making as well. And sort of that's again why we do some of the myth busting stuff, and we have other information available as well. And even if you're not a member of the cabinet or the lead group, or you're not sort of chairs of a committee, you may have a role through overview and scrutiny as well, possibly sort of bringing some of the charge point operators along to future scrutiny meetings and asking how they're getting on with the work. We do a lot of work around accessibility. I'll touch on this briefly. We do sessions with local authority officers around this. We sort of bring them the latest information because there will be changes to this, and we sort of bring along people who are experts within the industry, within the operators, and people who are working, for example, with the advisory groups for government for people with disabilities. And there is this standard PAS 1899, which is very much looking to address that. So the figures that we're seeing from Motability is that there's something like 2.7 million disabled drivers in the UK. The biggest fleet buyer of electric vehicles is actually Motability, and they're doing an awful lot of work to transition people to electric cars. Doesn't work for every single person, they know that, but the majority of them are quite happy with them at the moment. I should just that. Because that is a scam phone call. I recognise the number. And it's very much about making sure that within your authority you've got the right charge points in the right location for the right use. And that's the end of our presentation. So I shall just click off that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard and Mark.
Okay.
I think we'll jump in terms of time to the combined authority one. So if Katie, if you could please host the slides. Thank you. So for the Levi Fund, it's a local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. Designated within that are Tier 1 authorities, so that's the Combined Authority and North Somerset Council. And then the Tier 2 authorities are Baines, Bristol City Council and South Gloucestershire Council. Next slide, please. So for the DFT's aims in the Levi Fund, it's primarily to deliver a step change deployment of primarily low-powered on-street charging across England. And it's that wish to accelerate the commercialisation, the investment in creating that local charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. So with that, it's basically a fund to support local authorities in England to deliver this rollout and commercialisation of the local charging infrastructure. The Combined Authority is a designated Tier 1 as responsible for managing the Levi project at a regional kind of strategic level and to really help support the local authorities in the deployment of this charging infrastructure. And what we're doing is going out to tender for a concessionary partner. So that's a private charge point operator, which we call a CPO. And this kind of ensures that EV charging is implemented in a manner that's both accessible and equitable across the region. And this is really to provide access to on-street charge points for those who do not have off-street charging or have limited access to off-street charging and a need to charge their electric vehicles now or in the future. So next slide, please. The Combined Authorities project, so as I said, we're leading the procurement of a private concessionaire partner, and it's expected to last around a 15-year contract. This has been recommended by the DFT, and it's within what's called the heads of terms that we are sort of designing our contract to. So it's really creating that stable network for across the region. So as I said, we're leading the procurement on the behalf of Baines, South Gloucestershire, and we've also joined with North Somerset as another Tier 1, and there's a long-standing EV partnership history, and it's also to increase our appeal to the market as we go out to tender, and also that kind of greater our offer, the more we're going to get back from the market. Our support bodies for this fund are the Energy Saving Trust, we've heard Mark and Richard are from, but also we have Cenex and PA Consulting, which we have been working really closely with to develop our tender before it goes out. Next slide, please. So our bid, we submitted a successful stage 1 bid in May 23, and we were assigned to tranche 1 of this funding. So as you can see, these are the amount we received for our capital and capability. And we've been using this, we'll be using this funding in partnership with the private sector, gaining private sector investment to deliver around 2,000 sockets across the west of England and North Somerset. So from this, the main procurement, which is 3.5 million, will cover the areas of South Gloss and Baines, and North Somerset will continue to contribute their level of capital funding, bringing us up to 4.3 for the region. Next slide, please. So if we go through the project stages, stage 1, as I said, was submission of interest. So we submitted that in May 23 and it was successful. We've just submitted our stage 2 submission in June this year, which is our application form and our criterions for compliance and the tender document review. So this is all our information tender, our pre-tender documents for EST and OZEP and DFT to mark our homework, as it says. We're expecting this back in the next 6 weeks, and hopefully we'll then go on to stage 3, which stage 3 is the contract review. So after we've gone out to tender, we will have to submit a draft contract to the DFT for them to review before we can sign it with this successful tenderer. If we go to the next slide, please. So for the options we're looking at in charge points across the region, we're primarily looking at these 3 types. So the standard 7 kilowatt bollard type for on street, but we have several cases in car parks that haven't yet got charging, where we can put these faster 22 kilowatt chargers in, and occasionally in some areas a 50 kilowatt charger. So a lot of these car parks are close to residents who have limited access to on-street, off-street parking, and that's where we'd like to put these other two. But primarily it's going to be the 7 kilowatt bollard type. If we go to the next slide, please. So selecting sites for charging, it's been a really collaborative approach between the Combined Authority and UA officers, and we have developed a site selection tool which we will hand over and work with a successful charge point operator from the tender. The purpose, or what we call these mandatory sites. So this is not language we tend to use with the public, but we are creating a list where we feel that, and the tool kind of puts out that these are charge point locations that would require charging, and they may not be as commercially as interesting to these charge point operators. And it's really to ensure we get that accessible and equitable distribution across the region. So we took a hexagon approach. So the tool takes a 400 by 400 meter hex, and that's an area which we'll then hand over to the CPO, and we work with them and the UA officers to identify those areas within the hex. And there's lots of other factors, such as we'll have to factor in access to the grid, public input, and what existing infrastructure there is in place. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the site selection tool, as I said, it takes from a variety of data sets, such as expected demands, levels of deprivation, and rurality of locations, as well as existing charge points in the region, and also taking data from our site selection tool, which I'll go into a moment. But there's that kind of level of a lot of stuff has gone into this, and we've created these hex. Modelling outputs have been further refined through quality assurance process with the UA officers, where we have looked at each individual hex we've created, and also bringing in sort of incorporating your councillor concerns and residents' requests into this. Next slide, please. So if I can, Christina's on the call.
Yeah, I'm here. So
cool, and if I hand over to you.
Yeah, no problem. So hi, I'm Christina Glassball. I'm the main officer within South Gloucestershire Council. I guess just to give a bit of background, within South Gloucestershire, we actually published an EV charging infrastructure strategy in March 2023. And we've been essentially just been working towards our goal to try and ensure that the vast majority of our residents are within a 1 mile radius of charging infrastructure. So I guess we see the Levi project as a pathway to try and increase that visibility of charging infrastructure within the region. And what we do know, and what Sophie's already mentioned, is that we know the private sector is already going to kind of focus on those motorway and supermarkets and those higher powered solution because they're more commercially attractive and they've got high levels of turnover. So this Levi project, I guess, kind of is aimed to try and ensure that we're not leaving certain communities behind. So those rural communities to deprived communities and locations that might lack off-street parking. And we also see the Levi project as being a really good project to try and help with the progress of these local public charging stations, because it kind of caters to a diverse group of people. So people that may be on a lower or middle income that might have older and smaller EVs as well, which makes it perfectly suited towards those slower chargers. And also those DPD drivers that are kind of going around our roads all the time, and taxi drivers, as they can act as like a dual purpose. So it's got a really good user case for our communities. So at the moment, the plan is to try and deploy around 166 chargers. We have 75% of those locations should be 7 kilowatt chargers, and then the remaining locations we're hoping to try and install in car parks. And there'll be kind of a mixture between, as Sophie said, the fast chargers or the rapid chargers. And in terms of the selection of the sites themselves, 20% of them will be pre-selected. Sophie used the term mandatory, and they're mandatory because we want to try and essentially leverage these sites out of the appointed contractor. And we're going to be focusing on choosing locations that are politically important. They are rural sites, they are deprived locations, or they're just aligned with our strategic goals. So I think in summary, what I want to say is that this is very much a community project. And I think all the officers will say the same thing, where we want to make sure that we're kind of engaging with you guys all the way throughout this delivery of the scheme. So you'll be hearing a lot more from us going forward.
Thank you, Christina. Next slide, please. I think we have Jacob Ellis on the call, if you'd like to take over.
Yes, hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm Jake Ellis, I'm the EVI lead for Bath and North East Somerset. So you're kind of going to hear similar sort of stuff, I think, from all the UA officers across the board. But I mean, our strategy it was published in March 2022, I believe it was. So it was before I joined, but it doesn't rely on a single solution. In tandem with policies that reduce car dependency and promote walking, cycling and public transport, we are encouraging a shift to low emission vehicles through this sort of work. So this is a part of a comprehensive package to tackle transport emissions head on. So to support this transition, we're rolling out the network of electric vehicle chargers across the region. Similarly to what Christina said, the focus will be predominantly on 7 kilowatt chargers to meet those residential needs, alongside a number of 50 kilowatt rapid chargers and 22 kilowatt chargers to power our up and coming fully electric car club. Again, similar to Christina, at least 20% of our charging sites will be selected directly by Baines through myself and through engagement with yourselves as my councillors. This allows us to prioritise locations that may not be commercially attractive, such as rural or deprived areas, and those that are politically important or aligned with long-term strategic goals that we have. So this approach ensures that our EV infrastructure is not only robust and future ready, but also equitable, serving all communities, not just the most profitable ones.
Brilliant, thank you, Jake. And next slide, Chris Fletcher, would you like to take over?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, just a couple of minutes from me just to, I suppose, address the North Somerset ward members that we got on the call. It's great to see you here. Similar to what these guys have said, you know, this is all about contributing to our electric vehicle strategy. We've got a couple of ward members that were actually contributed to the writing of that thing in the first place in 2023. So this is kind of building on that approach, which was to find a concessionaire. Very similar approach to what South Gloss and Baines are doing. However, the slight difference is that we still have a fair number of community car parks, North Somerset owned car parks, where there is kind of a dual use for residents nearby, but also things like shopping or tourism. And we've agreed with the DFT that we can actually make, I suppose, prioritize some of those in the way that we roll this out. That includes some rapids, of course, as well as Christina spoke about in South Gloss. So yeah, we've had that agreed. There will still be some on the street, of course, but we're trying to prioritise those car parks and get those done. We expect us to be able to deliver these much quicker. I know Mike's on the call, and he'll back us up that we haven't been able to deliver things quickly in North Somerset from a technical resource perspective. So bringing in the charge point operator in this sense is the way that we get this rollout done quickly and efficiently and at the scale that we need to. So there's a bit of hard work to get us there, but once we get to the delivery phase, we should see this stuff flying out. It also gives us a bit more time to then engage with those residents on street. When we need to get to those locations. So if we're rolling out car parks in the background, we'll be coming around and making sure that we've done our due diligence and a really thorough engagement with residents where those on-street locations perhaps are ready to take on-street demand. So really, this is very early information for EVs. There's been some really basic information for you guys in this. So I know some of you are quite well versed in EV already, but for those that aren't, I'm hoping this has been really useful. I think the next stage for us in North Somerset, and I think the guys in the other authorities as well, is to come and speak to you all individually. It's really important that we understand, like we've done our modelling, but we know modelling can only take us so far. So we kind of want to understand where geographically you would like to see EV charging and where you would support it, but also really importantly from our perspective, where you wouldn't and where you wouldn't want to see it. That's just as critical to making sure that this is a really smooth delivery for us. If you know of any areas of contention or issues that you have, or you might have other strategic priorities in your ward that you don't want this to get in the way of in certain areas, that's absolutely fine. That's kind of what we want to do. So we'll be reaching out to members directly to ask these questions, and I'd love to kind of come and speak to you on site in your wards, and we could walk around and talk this stuff through to see what you want us to do with your areas. Talk through some of the places where we've seen some demand from the resident suggestions tools, but also, you know, if you want to beat me to it and contact me directly, then let's do that. So get in touch with me and by email, and I'd be more than happy to come and see you in person or just take a phone call. So yeah, very early stages now. we'll be doing some more resident engagement, but it's most important that we've got you guys up to speed to start with.
Thank you, Chris. Go to the next slide, please. So the one that you may have noticed is not a part is Bristol City Council. So Bristol City Council have a pre-existing pre-procured partner for the Bristol City Leap joint venture. So we will allocate their portion of the funding over to them to procure a charge point operator through their existing joint venture. While they're also not a part of our main procurement, they will be following the similar set of MCA Combined Authority of principles of providing primarily on-street charging to residents and ensuring that it's accessible and fair across the region. So whilst they're not joining us, they're taking on many of our principles to ensure that cohesiveness across the region. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we have basically an indicative timeline. So this is how it is at the moment. This is our best understanding, but please understand that things could move. So as I said, May, we submitted the EOI. In the summer 24, we launched a resident site suggestion tool where we asked residents across the region, where would you like to see on-street charging? And I think to date, we've had over 1,400 suggestions, which we have taken a cut into the modelling tool you've seen, but we're also kind of keeping it open to get as many suggestions as possible. And at the end of these slides and sent out to you, I will share a link to this tool. So for that. As I said, we submitted our stage 2 submission in June 25, and then we're looking forward now. So we expect in October to go live with the tender. So we're going out to market for a concessionaire partner in October, and then October we're going to go out with an engagement survey as well. So that's a public engagement survey where we're going to be asking residents, what's your understanding of on-street charging? How do you feel about on-street charging and your kind of propensity and predisposition to buy an EV charger as well? So we're going to get that baseline understanding of what the public see in terms of on-street charging. And then early winter, we hope to put our stage 3 submission in. So that's that draft contract into the DFT for them to mark our contract. And then once we've had that go ahead, we hope to sign that contract in the spring of 26. And hopefully, successfully, fingers crossed, looking to that rollout of EV charging from summer 26 onwards. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the kind of bit you're probably most interested is around the resident engagement approach. As I said, we launched that tool, which I'll share a link with you, and then we're going to launch the resident survey. This will go out for 8 weeks through across the MCA and authority social media, paid advertisement, and identified stakeholder groups. In terms of a call for action, we'd appreciate support from councillors and ward members to help highlight the survey to your residents. As well as the site suggestion tool. I'll pass these in the links at the end. This summer, we're going to refresh the Travel West pages on electric vehicles, relaunching an FAQ, a short animation to get around on what on-street charging is, as well as what the Levi project is going to be as well. And then, as I said, in spring 26, what we'll do, we will work with the successful CPO to create a joint resident consultation and engagement plan, because as I said, as we're not yet in a contract, we need to find the right supplier that we can work with, because there will be different tools that each supplier will bring or different methods. So we're going to create that joint engagement plan for how we're going to engage residents and as we roll out EV charging. So while we're starting, we're going to get a baseline for our survey. We will then work with our successful CPO and create that real engagement plan of how we're going to speak to residents as we roll this out. So next slide, please. As I said, coming to the end of the presentation, I will send out the slide pack with an FAQ and one of the recordings as well, and the links here to the Combined Authorities EV Charging Action Plan. Also, if you'd like a lengthy read, there is the DFT's Taking Charge, and that's the infrastructure strategy for the next 10 years. And then also I'll send out a link to the EV site suggestion tool. So I'd like to thank you for listening. If we go to the Q&A, we can go through questions. As I said, if you could put your hands up and say which combined authority you're from, and we'll work out who's best to work for your question. I think we have first up is Fiona.
Hi, thank you so much for this. It's fascinating. Personally, we are looking at trying to get an EV. Sorry, I'm from Bath and North East Somerset. I'm Cabinet Project Lead for Sustainable Rural Transport. I'm also member advocate for rural communities. So basically, I'm coming from the village's point of view. We're personally looking to buy a new EV car, so that's fascinating. Question I've got for you is, I know a number of the villages have expressed an interest in having EV charging, particularly in places like the village hall car parks. And I know some of them have had previous conversations with other providers, but it has mostly got nowhere. So I think the idea that you are emphasising the rurality, I mean, you know, there are houses that don't have pavements, let alone, you know, have narrow roads. So there are a number of people who would appreciate having some sort of central site within their community that actually they could charge their cars at. So I'm all in favour of this and really keen to get involved. So thank you.
Nick, did you want to touch upon that kind of rurality in veins?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so this is obviously to talk about the Levi project on the whole, but there are other delivery projects going on at the moment, one being called the Green Recovery Fund, Green Recovery EV Fund. Fiona, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about delivering, so that is EV charging in those areas that wouldn't be necessarily commercially viable for an operator. So I would be more than happy to take this offline and have a conversation about a site that you might think is good in your area, and any other ones whilst we're still at the point of making those decisions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that.
Okay. And Chris, I can see your hand up.
One of the severe limitations of the current funding schemes in outside the core urban areas is that in a community, the most obvious place, you don't want to put your car somewhere that's a long way from your home to charge if you're in a house that for various reasons can't have EV charging. Either the road's too narrow, or their Radburn design, or distance from parking space to fuse box is too great, any of those sorts of reasons. There's a real problem that you've got to have them closest enough to people and somewhere people feel safe to be putting their car on, rather than walking home or hanging around. And that is quite often a community building, a parish hall, a parish community building. And we've been encountering problems in communities, Pocket Church is an obvious one, where actually the right place to put the charger is outside the parish hall. And the current funding systems don't seem to permit that. And if you want people in more rural areas to have access to chargers, that's got to be cracked.
Thank you, Chris. In terms of Christina, did you want to take a point of view from SGC? Very happy to me.
Yeah, no, you can crack on, but no, Chris is right. We do get an awful lot of asks for people to kind of put stuff in village halls, parish halls, and it often is the best location. I guess historically we have found it challenging as part revived in kind of third-party kind of assets, and a lot of the funding at the moment, the criteria isn't suitable for third-party land. So we kind of have to focus on council-owned land at the moment. So it is an issue that I guess there isn't a easy answer for at the moment, unless I guess Sophie, you want to.
No. Unless that is cracked, and part of a seminar like this is about taking feedback, unless that is cracked, then in Pocket Church, every bit of on street that we've looked at for various reasons has been problematic. And actually, we can't go ahead like that. We actually have to crack the problem that unless we want to exclude rural and outside the urban area of England from public EV chargers.
Yeah,
they don't have the shop with a car park. They may have a pub with a car park, but it's a private car park. And unless you're a very high footfall village pub, you don't have the full. I know some pubs use it as a way to get people in to have meals in the pub by their car charges, but that's a tiny, tiny minority of pubs. So we're excluding, and we're not talking about titchy little villages of 50 people. I'm talking about places as big as Pocket Church being totally excluded, which is bonkers.
Chris, I appreciate what you're raising, and we have as officers raised this through the Levi roadshows, and we have raised it through our connections to the support body and OSEF. So I completely understand where you're coming from. Matthew, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, thank you. So certainly heard that, and I sort of completely agree with you that we want locations that are close to where people live and safe. I mean, you're absolutely right that people are only going to use them if they feel safe. I mean, we will have to work within the rules that DFT have set us, so we'll see sort of what we can do and sort of what we can and can't do. One thing we're considering is something called clustering within the contract, which is that someone else might be able to buy in to our terms. So, for example, a parish council might be able to sort of buy into it. So there might be ways to do it, but it's very useful to hear that, and we are looking at how we get the right charges for the right people in the right places.
And Mark?
I just wanted to say it is challenging through Levi to do things in non-council owned assets, but that doesn't mean to say that when you do appoint your CPOs, that they won't be willing to do things off their own backs in those areas as part of that overall contract. It depends. I don't want to speak for any of the authorities in how those contracts are set up, but if it is possible that the CPO can propose some of their own sites as well and fully fund those sites if they're happy to do so, there's more than possible that some of those sites the sites that you mentioned, Chris, will come under those sites that CPOs might be willing to fund as a package of kind of sites across the whole area, rather than as individual sites where they're perhaps not going to be as profitable.
It would be really good to have seeing Fiona's comment, to have a village hall scheme where there was a single package that was offered to each community, to a village hall in each community. And I think most village halls, most communities would have at least one village hall that will bite your arm off at the shoulder and will be only too glad, because it brings footfall to the village hall. It's a place where people are likely to be for 2 or 3 hours. So it's a really good place for charging. And it just seems bizarre that we can't put that together. There are other funding streams for different things where the uniqueness of the village hall is recognised, and it seems very odd that the 21st century doesn't appear to be allowed to engage with them. They get money to do stuff that's looking back to the past but not looking to the future.
I appreciate that, Chris, and thank you for your comment. If I'm going to fish one out of the chat, and that's from John. Has there any thought been given to public charge points for legally private-owned electric bicycles and motor vehicles? In terms of Levi, this wouldn't cover it, but I'm not sure if Mark or Richard know of any. I do not believe there is at the moment.
Not that I know of. Obviously, at the moment, there is a very small pool of legally owned e-bikes and e-scooters where they're allowed to run. I guess it's kind of wait and see how that changes, and therefore, if and when those do get rolled out further as a legal mode of transport, then there might be some charging that kind of comes along with it. But yeah, nothing I know of at the moment.
Yeah, but it is a very, very different type of charger to the ones that you do for a car anyway. It's much slower and much lower voltages.
Appreciate that. All I would say is we need more two-wheeled transport and less four-wheeled transport. Thank you for that.
That's right.
Just to put on the world, quite a lot of companies such as Falco are creating those kind of bike EV charging lockers. So they're kind of the locker for the battery going in. And I've had troubles where I wanted to put one of these in a university and the insurance got in the way. So there's quite a few parts of this as well to like catch up as well. So Mark as well.
I just wanted to pick up on another comment that you made in the chat way earlier on, John, about the transition from motorcycles to EV. I had a quick Google in the background while Richard was presenting, and I can't find anything about the phase out for ICE bikes. Obviously, there are a number of EV options for motorbikes. I'm not a motorcyclist, so I don't know how good they are. But I know the ones that do exist can charge on a Type 2 charger. Obviously, they have that much smaller battery, so it doesn't take as long. But yeah, apologies, my knowledge of EV motorbikes is small.
Okay, well, I'll stick to my petrol-powered motorcycle for the time being then. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at all? Stunned silence. I'm going to, in terms of if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out and one of our EV officers will come back to you on those. As I said, we'll send a recording out of one of the 2 sessions and also a sort of FAQ in terms of questions and clarifications. and the slide packs and links that I mentioned in terms of the site suggestion tool. I would say we'll come back to you in October around the resident engagement survey, and that should be going out across those channels. So if you could encourage your residents to partake in this, and also if you are getting requests for charging, please could you direct them to the EV site suggestion tool, because that would be really helpful for us to capture as much resident suggestion data as possible, so we know where to put these, and it will all feed in terms of the modelling. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thank you from myself and the UA officers, as well as from Richard and Mark for attending. Thank you, and you're free to have 23 minutes back of your day. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
Richard and Mark, thank you for everything you've done.